There's really only one way we can begin an episode like this, and it is allegedly, and then open quote, and then we'll close the quote at the end of the show, because this one is going to be nuts.
So we're usually going back to the old Snuka, allegedly bringing that back a little bit.
We are, from here till I close the quote, we are protected under allegedly.
Huh. And if you just say it, that means it works? Like, we definitely won't get in trouble just because we're saying that?
I assume so.
And do we put 3 dots behind allegedly? Because that's a big pet peeve of mine. When you're like leaving that space, like,
yeah,
wait,
we need an ellipses. Do we need an ellipses?
Dot, like, just the 3.
Yeah.
So you didn't really do legal research on this shit? Come on.
Well, welcome to 10 Bell Pod, where we tell the story of past pro wrestlers. That makes sense, right?
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, all right. At first, I was like, man, what are you even talking about?
You're having a stroke this early?
Are you having an ellipses?
I am Nick Alexander, and I am skimming 25% off the top of this podcast alongside Micah J. Loving.
I'm doing like 5% because, I'm respectful.
And we are in the Manning Cave with the Man Scout, Mr. Jake Manning.
And I'm the one doing all the work while you guys are doing the skimming. So just let you know. So I'm the one actually taking all the bumps. You guys are making me pay rent on my own domicile.
It's so nice, though, just to
and then I have to pay for training, even though I'm making you money from this training. It's a whole rigmarole.
And I'm going to force you to sleep with Colt Cabana so that he mentions us on the art of wrestling.
Can I sleep with Conrad Thompson?
All right, fine.
All right.
So today we're covering our first Patreon requested person. Thank you, Margaret Taylor.
This is how we started? Like, talk about sleeping with Conrad Thompson? Is this the content that she requested for us?
Oh, she knows what she's getting into.
Okay,
just think about that visual, everybody. Just think about that.
Mm-hmm.
So today we're talking about one of the most polarizing people in pro wrestling history, a paradoxical figure who did more for women's wrestling than just about anyone in history, while at the same time causing enormous damage, not just to women's wrestling, but to the women in it. To some, she was the first goddess of the squared circle. To others, she was the most evil woman to walk the planet. She was the fabulous Moolah. Mary Lillian Ellison was born July 22nd, 1923 in Kershaw County, South Carolina. She was the youngest of 13 kids, which is actually the exact same thing as my mom.
Kershaw, South Carolina, has got a rich wrestling history. Not only is it birth place of the fabulous Moolah, but also Kershaw, South Carolina is where I wrestled Steve Carino for an hour Broadway.
Ooh.
It is both our only legit hour Broadway. I had a worked hour Broadway with Team Action, and then he had a worked hour Broadway with Doug Williams. So there is a little bit of history there in Kershaw, and actually that match is available on my 6-disc DVD set, which you can get with one of the Patreon tiers. So we snuck in a little Patreon plug in the middle of all this as well.
Did you and Steve do Cats or Oklahoma?
I'm just going to keep making this sound for 3 hours. All right. Throughout this podcast episode, I'm going to be providing fun facts from Moolah and May's RF video shoot because Jake didn't listen to it and Nick didn't because they are smarter and have lived better lives. As you will see, the RF video description is one of the most fun and entertaining shoot interviews you will ever see with two pure legends of pro wrestling in Johnny Mae Young and Hall of Famer Fabulous Moolah. It's a truly tremendous shoot because you get to hear questions you've never heard in a shoot, like, how did World War II affect the wrestling business? Some people want to talk shit on certain message boards and say it's one of the worst shoots ever, up there with Dana Dameson. Do you know her, Jake?
She was a porn star that Rob did a shoot interview with one time.
Carlos Colon. Arn Anderson. Does he have a bad shoot?
Yeah, because he doesn't break kayfabe.
He's one of them. Baron von Raschke's. I'm guessing that's another kayfabe one.
No, that was a High Spots one. So he was just weird. He was slipping in and out of character. Like, he was like, we recorded it very late at night, and then he would just slip in and out of character, and that's when I would wake up and go, oh, what's going on? This is weird.
And the last one listed Jules Strongbow.
Oh, screw you guys if you didn't list Jimmy Snuka's shooter interview as the worst of all time.
Yeah,
that's true. All right, so throughout this episode, I'm going to be telling you really amazing things, and it's going to be the Did You Know, Nick segment. So for the first one, did you know, Nick, that within the first 30 seconds of the shoot interview, that Rob Feinstein attempts to introduce Moolah and May by using the adjective of reverent, but instead of saying that, he says irrelevant. No, not irrelevant, which would be saying Moolah and May are pointless and no one cares about them anymore, which is mean. But no, he said irrelevant, a word that does not fucking exist. So not only does Rob not say the adjective he originally intended, but he says a word that totally shits all over Moolah and May, and he fucking butchers the pronunciation out of it. But this is how words are made, so I say we start this now. Irrelevant, a highly dignified but emitting an odd odor you can't quite place.
I'm surprised you didn't introduce them as women that were around in the time when the movie The Revenant took place. That would have been a far better introduction.
Growing up outside of Columbia, South Carolina, Moolah would have to deal with tragedy at a very young age, with her mother dying of cancer when Lillian was just 8 years old. Not long after that, her father began taking her to pro wrestling shows, and Lillian always liked the matches and the experience well enough, but it was when she saw women's champion Mildred Burke that the fire to become a pro wrestler was lit. So, blame Mildred for all of this.
Which, did you know, Nick, even in the shoot interview, Mae Young says that Mildred Burke kind of sucks.
Wow, really?
Yeah, I mean, she doesn't say those words, but she's kind of like, she wasn't the greatest wrestler. It's like, shit, man. She shits on everybody in this thing.
The same could be said with Moolah, but we're talking about, like, Mildred being the placeholder. Much like Hogan, like Hogan, not the best in the ring, but when you thought professional wrestling, Hulk Hogan. Yeah. All the stuff that Mildred had to deal with her fucking hot garbage husband, we'll get into probably in the next few minutes.
Apparently, her father disapproved of Moolah becoming a wrestler so much that at the age of 14, she done RUNNOFT to get married to a 21-year-old Walter Carroll. Now, at the ripe old age of 15 years old, Lillian had her daughter, Marionette Carroll. And not long after she had her baby, she divorced her husband and left her kid with a friend so she could set off to become a pro wrestler.
That's kind of a common theme with women that got into professional wrestling during that time, as we discussed with our episode of Babs Wingo and Ethel Johnson, is these women who got pregnant very early or were single mothers, striving to figure out how they're going to come up with income to be a single mother in the 50s and 60s and early 70s, and just clueless. And then they stumble upon professional wrestling as a main source of income and were able to raise their kids with a brutal travel schedule, a physically demanding business, and then still providing for a family at the end of the day. I mean, that's how a lot of these women get into it. So it's, kudos to these women for being that tough in that era and seeing this as like, okay, this is a viable career opportunity for me to make real money to provide for my family, but not just like survive, but kind of thrive in some instances.
Lillian began her wrestling career with Mildred Burke's husband, Billy Wolf. And we touched on Billy back in episode 16. If you listen to that, you know Wolf was how you say human garbage. Wolf was notorious for making the women he employed sleep with him, hanging their careers and livelihoods over their heads until they did. He'd pressure, if not outright force them to sleep with other promoters, all while skimming a good chunk of money off their pay. Billy Wolf is the Phantom Menace to the Moolah trilogy.
And also, too, it's a complicated past. He was the one pushing for women's wrestling and opening the doors for these women to have these opportunities to even begin with. But it is very much pimp and prostitute-esque in the sense that you take somebody who is downtrodden. Like I said, a lot of these women were single mothers trying to find some sustainable income for their children, for their family, and provide for them. And here comes this man who's offering them opportunity, work, income, a better life, far better life than they could for any other source of income. But at the same time, too, not only is it physically demanding, but abusive on all levels.
It's the whole thing of, yeah, you got to commend him for doing this and opening this up, but it's just like, or he just saw an opening for it that would make him money, and he knew he could exploit it and take advantage of it.
Yeah, I think we covered it pretty well in the last episode, the many aspects of it, the good, bad, and indifferent, and we'll probably have a deeper discussion of that a little bit later on. I'm all about the teasers this episode. I'm all about the teasers for an episode they're already listening to.
But while working with Billy, Lillian did get to compete with women like her future BFF, Mae Young, Cecilia Blevins, and even her hero, Mildred Burke. After about a year, Moolah stood up to Billy Wolf and left his company, burning that bridge forever. Lillian eventually met Jack Pfeffer, who is an interesting guy, and one of the first people to publicly expose pro wrestling. He was the one who asked Lillian why she wrestled, and she said for the moolah. And it was Pfeffer who gave her the moniker Slave Girl Moolah.
Did you know, Nick, that a wrestling license was a whopping $2 back in the day?
How much is it now, Jake?
Well, in some states it's $20. Some states it's 30, 40. So with inflation, that's
basically
on par.
inflation.
Yeah.
So by the early 1950s, Moolah was a valet for the Nature Boy, Buddy Rogers.
Oh.
However, that pairing ended badly when Buddy just refused to quit trying to fuck her. So Ric Flair really stole everything.
Buddy is also kind of hot garbage too. Like, he's that's
I like
gonna be
when you
interesting.
say things and you insult someone, but we can hear you smiling about it.
Yeah, there's just not a lot of good redeeming qualities to Buddy Rogers.
So again, Moolah severed yet another tie with a very major name in pro wrestling. Moolah would then valet for Tony Alivias, a.k.a. Elephant Boy, who was not an animal, he was a human being.
John Merrick, boom.
So Alivias was Mexican, but he had very dark skin, which led to some drama because Moolah would kiss him on the cheek during his ring entrance, in the 50s. To show how fucking stupid racists are, at a one show in Oklahoma City, a man thought Tony was black. So he tried to stab Moolah after she kissed Tony. They don't even know what they hate. They just know they hate it.
Yeah. I mean, because, he has a knife on him at all times.
Just in case a white woman kisses a black...
if I see something black and white, I'm going to stab it.
Break glass if you see a white woman kiss a black... Imagine if you took that man, dumped him into 2019, and then showed him Wrestling 10's Twitter feed. He would lose his mind. He would burn this country to the ground.
After leaving Pfeffer's promotion, Moolah went to Boston to work for Tony Santos and Paul Bowser. And at this point, Moolah had begun training girls, and it was a huge deal that Paul Bowser agreed to use Moolah's girls instead of Billy Wolf's. If it weren't for this, there's a chance Moolah's career would have tanked. Well, Wolf wasn't booking her. In fact, Wolf blackballed Mildred Burke from American wrestling after their divorce, so he wouldn't have given two fucks about Moolah. On top of that, she had bad blood with NWA's biggest draw, so basically she had to form her own company of women. Vince McMahon Sr.'s Capital Wrestling would also jump on the Moolah train in 55, booking not just Moolah, but also using her girls from her camp. On September 18th, 1956, as part of Vince Sr.'s territory, Moolah won a 13-woman battle royal to win the vacant World's Women's Championship.
Yeah, woo.
But like a lot of belts back in the day, she wasn't always recognized as the women's champion, mostly because the NWA was still the most important promotion in the country, and their champions were the champions.
Well, that's kind of the same thing that happened. The WWF world title, and then that whole stipulation it transitioned from Buddy Rogers to Bruno Sammartino, and then claiming that New York's belt is a world championship, and we're no longer recognizing the NWA one as our world belt, and that whole split off from there is very similar to what obviously was going on with the female title as well. It's just kind of that split. They're like, no, New York, this is a world belt as well. This isn't just a territory belt. This is a world championship.
It was Vince Sr. who gave Moolah the name The Fabulous Moolah, and she began a title run of 10 years, maybe, kind of, sort of, with Moolah's title runs as well as some of the terrible things she did, as well as some of the good things she did. There is a lot of kayfabing and exaggeration, if not outright lying.
Yeah.
It was pro wrestling in the 50s and 60s. The record keeping wasn't great, and kayfabe was alive and well.
Well, the whole reason NWA existed was to launder money for mobsters. To which I would reply to your statement, Nick, duh. It came from carnivals. Came to carnivals, went to the mafia, and you want everybody to be a saint? No. And then you get to the 80s, and they're still threatening to pull guns on Vince McMahon Jr. I mean, it's never been safe until now when it's corporate and they're trying to court sponsors like Coca-Cola and Ford Motor Company. And even still, you still have your leftover outlaws that used to wear Confederate flags in the ring that write TV every Tuesday.
I mean, isn't there a story of Harley Race bringing a gun to kill Hulk Hogan?
Everybody brought a gun. Everybody brought a gun. The Halliburton briefcase, a lot of the wrestlers had them. Like when you were a big deal, you had the Halliburton. Yeah. I would probably say 80% of all wrestler Halliburtons had a gun in it. Yeah. I just heard Eric Bischoff tell a story about Paul Orndorff in a booking meeting was just sat down and he's like, oh, he was sitting down uncomfortably, and they just put his gun and then slapped it down as if he was sitting on his wallet. I'm going to be sitting down for a while. I don't want to sit on my wallet and sit uneven. Let me just take it out and put that on the table. No, he did that with a gun at WCW.
It was a protect your spine
and a 9mm.
Yeah.
After June Byers retired in 1964, Moolah was finally recognized as the official undisputed women's world champion as Capital, now turned WWF, was the rising dominant promotion. Moolah eventually lost on September 17th, 1967 to Betty Boucher, winning the title back just weeks later. She also traded the belt with Yukiko Tomei during a tour of Japan in 68.
In all my research of those dates and stuff, it seems like some pop up with actual sources and then some don't. And then, like Nick said earlier, just like the records back then were not good. Moolah, when she lost them, it was usually she'd lose it, get it back within a day, right?
Yeah,
every single time.
Well,
she did not lose it for long.
Some of those things were done to pop the town. Like as a situation like, hey, Allentown's been doing really well. Let's go ahead and do a switch, but we got TV coming back around. We'll switch it back when we get to Scranton or in Philadelphia. So we'll do something in Allentown for the house show because they've been, the crowd's been building, make them feel a little more special. So that way we get more people back the next time. But by the time she's already back around, she's already wearing the belt as it is. And then some of these people, their lives are not invested. Some people's lives get very invested in what goes on Monday night and this and their feelings about it and how they report about it and what podcasts they do about it and what say on Twitter about it. So people are like, oh, okay, they switched the belt. Oh, she's got the belt again? I don't know that happened. I just, it's just like nobody put that much thought to it. And sometimes going to Japan, even as late as in the 90s, wrestling promotions do whatever you want in Japan. Doesn't matter. Nobody's seeing that anyways. Yeah. Not understanding the complexities of tape trading and then the growth of the internet and newsletters, and that information does get out, even as far as the late 90s. So back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, a title switch in Japan meant nothing. Just as long as you win it back before you fly back on the plane, it makes no difference.
But God, after 28 years, 3, maybe 4 of those occurring fucking Moolah.
But you look at Bruno Sammartino.
Oh, I know, yeah.
But we like Bruno, Jake.
But it's all about stability.
Yeah.
It's all about, Bruno would have held it longer if he didn't, have some of the health issues and probably wanted to go home and spend some time with his wife.
Stan Hansen wouldn't have broke his fucking neck.
Yeah, all of those things. But you look at someone like Moolah, who's like, no, I'm all about the money and wrestling. Yeah. You'll hang on to it forever. If Bruno Sammartino was the same exact way, Bruno might have had a 20-year title reign. I don't know.
That was the difference. Bruno was like, get the belt off me. Get it off me. Moolah was like, here's a picture of your kids. I know where they sleep. I'll keep the belt, thank you. So on July 1st, 1972, Moolah became the first woman allowed to wrestle at the Madison Square Garden, which had previously banned women's wrestling. In fact, Moolah helped overturn the ban on women's wrestling in the entire state of New York, with the New York State Athletic Commission lifting the ban June of 72. Now, Jake, how could someone wrestle at Madison Square Garden even though, and let me check my notes here, even though they have a vagina?
I know it's impossible. I'm sure the commission, when the first other times they try and do it, he was running down alongside like that famous picture of that man trying to stop the woman from running the Boston Marathon because he's afraid that all that long distance running, her innards were just going to fall out because the women were so frail. So I'm sure there's a famous picture somewhere of a female walking to the ring at Madison Square Garden and a commission going to grab her ring jacket and prevent her from getting in the ring. But yeah, New York State Athletic Commission, kind of squirrely.
Kind of garbage now.
Yeah, the interactions that I've had with those guys been awesome, great, do their job, fantastic. Always make small talk with them. Pretty cool guys. If you've dotted all your I's and crossed all your T's, it's smooth sailing, no problem whatsoever. And a lot of times they're there to protect the fans, to make sure that their interest is taken care of, in the sense that the people that were advertised are going to show up. The show's not going to start at a different time than it says. Like, it's not going to start early and people would miss the wrestling. So there's all of those things that go into that. They do a pretty good job. And then also too, they require you to have doctors on hand, which I always appreciate. And especially if I'm going to get hurt, it's not like wrestling in West Virginia and the nearest hospital is 45 minutes away. So I appreciate those things, but then just how they have, treated MMA and like, oh, we can't have it whatsoever. And they don't make big moves very well, but I think a lot of the smaller stuff is very good. But some of their bigger moves, much like this, are a little overdone.
Yeah, just in the short time span that they have gotten MMA, just like weigh-ins, just every little nitpicky thing to ruin big fights that everybody is really fucking excited for. And yeah, the reputation of the New York Commission in the MMA world is pretty shit already.
In the late 70s, Moolah bought the rights to the Women's Championship, to which the Men Running Wrestling replied, "You could have just had it for free. We literally do not care." Moolah would lose her belt to Evelyn Stevens in 78 before winning it right back and then going undefeated for another 6 years. In 83, Vince McMahon Jr. was buying all things wrestling under the sun, and Moolah sold him the rights to her Women's World Championship, which led to Moolah becoming the first WWF Women's Champ.
Put on Wrestling Talk in 1990 on a public access show in Boston. She said she didn't do that.
And now we're getting into the Rock and Wrestling connection, the era that brought not just pro wrestling to the mainstream, but also women's wrestling into the mainstream as well. Cyndi Lauper had taken some time off from just having fun to feud with Captain Lou Albano. That led to Brawl to End It All, July 23rd of 84, live on MTV.
Yeah.
I remember when they used to just play music. In a trial by combat style match, Cyndi and Lou picked wrestlers to represent them. Moolah teamed up with Cap, and Wendy Richter teamed up with Cyndi Lauper. Wendy Richter was a megastar because of all this exposure. Some say on par with Hulk Hogan at the time. At Brawl, to end it all, Wendy would take on Moolah, the 28-year reigning champion, which we just said wasn't true, in a match that I'll say technically happened. Moolah rolled up Wendy for the 3 count. However, as part of the roll-up, Moolah's shoulders were actually down. So when Wendy put her shoulder up, Moolah was down for the count. So Wendy won the WWF Women's title.
It's just like she can't even get like a good, clean, decisive win. It's got to be a tricky, sneaky reveal to the crowd. And Jake doesn't like my thing
No,
here.
freaking Harley Race did that same exact fucking finish
I know, but it's like
with
if you
Ric
want to
Flair.
pop the crowd as much as you want for this big MTV shit, do you really want confusion and like what happened? I don't know. It just I wanted something big and decisive.
No.
Not this. What the fuck was that?
Because the pop isn't when the 3 count happens. The pop is when the person gets
it.
when they announce it. That's where you want the explosion to be.
But you could have multiple pops. They would pop every time.
Not for the big one. The big one is you want that confusion. You want that hubbub. And your winner is Wendy Richter. Like that's trust me, I have played that trick before. And it works like a fucking charm every single fucking time.
I mean, I know it can work, but it's just like for it to build up to this, I feel like it should have been. I don't know.
Yeah, but then like I said, Moolah's got to put her over clean. But also, two notes you don't have.
What?
You don't have a return.
Yeah, it's true.
You don't have a return match. You're gonna get that one pop, and then it's over and it's done. And then who's Wendy gonna wrestle?
Yep.
Do you have opponents lined up for Wendy right now? Because no, you don't. Because you're basically inventing the road that Wendy Richter is going to be traveling on. And like you said, some people think she was a superstar. Oh, I am one of those some people because I clearly remember the cartoon, the card games, she was clearly right next to Hulk Hogan. They were positioning wrestling to go mainstream, and something they finally figured out as of a couple years ago. If you really want to be fully mainstream, you want to fully penetrate the entire world, you can't be ignoring females in an athletic competition. And they were ready to do that in the 80s when all of this was going on. They were set up. They had their female Hulk Hogan. They had Wendy Richter. She was positioned to be that, and we're like, hey, we're going to penetrate the market. We're going to have Hulk Hogan for the little boys, and we got Wendy Richter for all the little girls. And then also too, Moolah can take it all around the horn and have all the rematches and go all the way around while we still got Cindy and have a return match. We got WrestleMania come up, and we can have a return there because that's what we're building to right now. So it was laid down, and we could have had respectable female wrestling far earlier than what we did. I mean, the tracks were laid. Now, as far as like the talent pool was a little weak, and it could have fallen on its face because of that.
You had Sherry coming up. You had a pretty young Luna, at least training at this point. Yeah, it could have been.
Yeah, I mean,
Jumping Bomb Angels.
Yeah, I mean, you get Judy Martin, you get Heart of the Glamour Girls. I mean, you look at, I think it was like Survivor Series 87. There was all-female Survivor Series match. So those are all 7 women that could have, gone up against Wendy Richter.
That didn't happen.
Nope.
So after losing the title to Richter, Moolah would be in Leilani Kai's corner February 18th, 1985, as she faced Wendy Richter with her pal Cyndi Lauper ringside. And as part of the finish to this match, Moolah attacked Cyndi, choking her, causing Wendy to come to her aid. When she did, Moolah popped her in the face, allowing Leilani to take control, roll Wendy up for the win, setting up a rematch at WrestleMania 1. At WrestleMania 1, again, Cyndi Lauper and the fabulous Moolah would be in their girls' corners, with Wendy getting the win and regaining the title. As we said, Wendy was one of the most over people in the company. You could argue she was the co-main event for WrestleMania 1, definitely brought to end it all. But when it came to getting paid, there was a huge difference between her and the men's, because obviously we deserve more pay for lugging around these big old dicks. Someone too sweet me.
We're doing that. That was a high five. I didn't want to do a high five, but too sweet's cool.
Wendy was pressuring Vince with a raise, to which I assume Vince tore a picture of Susan B. Anthony up in her face.
Oh.
Or maybe he was just like, I'm not fucking giving you more money because I'm a wrestling promoter. I know a shakedown when I fucking hear one.
Classic wrestling promoter.
And I've heard a lot of shooter interviews and people talk about Wendy Richter at this time and like, oh, she just got a big head. And that becomes typically the attitude like, oh, she was believing her own hype, when really she's just making a serious claim like, hey, I'm positioned next to Hulk Hogan
Exactly.
on all of these avenues. I'm asking for more money.
Not even equal pay, just some more.
That's what I think it turns into, that with so many people, like Jake said, talking about. It's like, she wanted Hulk Hogan money. I was like, I'm just sure she just wanted a little bump. Can I get a bump?
Because she knows her worth, she's a problem. And that's always the way wrestling is, male or female. If you know your worth and you demand your worth, like, oh, this guy's got a big head. Like, I have recently gone up in my booking fee. And when I lay it out for people, they're like, oh, I can't believe you want that much. And I'm like, well, I'm worth that much.
Yeah, go back and listen to Tim Bell Pod, bitch.
Yeah, like, I'm going to mention your show on like some of my podcasts. I have a Twitter following, Instagram. I probably even cut a promo with the Tent, who I hate.
He's a fucking dick.
To get over your show and let people know that your show is happening, to which you can get out and push out. So I'm doing work ahead of time at the show, and I'm going to work very hard and try to give you the best match on the show that I can and how it's positioned. And yeah, she's just asking for more pay. She's just asking for compensation. And of course, the wrestling promoters, when they hear that, like, oh, this person's bleeding me dry, this person has attitude. And I hear this all the time also too. I've heard this with female wrestlers a lot. You'll talk about a girl, like we'll be talking about booking somebody for WrestleCon or Queens of Combat, and people are like, oh, I hear she has an attitude. Every time I hear that, I go, okay, well, who said that?
Yeah.
Yep.
And then I hear that name, and then I go, oh, I've heard this guy talk about this other woman that says she has an attitude. And I'm like, this guy probably got turned down by this. So every time that I hear a girl has an attitude, quote unquote, I always have to run it through and then line everything up and then figure out who said it and then be like, no, this person, I've talked to this person, I know this person's a good person. The person that says that this girl has an attitude is got turned down by her. But also too, there are divas, but there's also male divas as well. Trust me, I
am one. No.
Colt Cabana wants things done a certain way, and I after working with him for a very long time, I know how those things are, and I will deliver those things. But sometimes it's like a situation of like, oh, do I really have to do this? And there are those like that, male and female.
Yep.
And sometimes when you're just trying to get through, you're like, oh, this person has an attitude. Like, Colt does not have an attitude. He just wants things done a certain way, because we're, at the end of the day, we're artists.
Realizing Wendy would just waste Vince's money on her periods, he came up with the scheme, and a match was booked for November 25th, 1985, when Wendy Richter would face the Spider Lady. Now, I've heard Wendy say she didn't know it was Moolah, which I think is just her blurring the lines of like old school, keeping kayfabe. I've also heard Wendy say she clearly knew it was Moolah, because how many people do you lock up with and their body feels like packing peanuts? At the end of the day, I think she knew it was Moolah. She even has this quote, "All I knew was with Moolah, I've got to look out for myself. She'll try to hurt you. She'll try to pin you. And I knew she couldn't pin me. She couldn't. But what I didn't count on was the referee getting paid off." During this match, which people refer to as the original screw job, Wendy gets rolled up for an inside cradle and clearly kicks out at one. But Steve Mazzagatti over there hits the mat 2 more times, the bell rings, and Wendy, Jesse Ventura, Gorilla Monsoon, and the crowd collectively are like, what the fuck?
It's a gorilla kind of... He's like, what? And then I listened to it multiple times because I didn't know if I missed it, but Jesse just like doesn't say anything for 90 seconds.
Yeah, I feel like he's processing it or something.
He does not understand. Like it's straight up like, what the fuck, man?
He probably has enough love for the boys type of thing in him where he was like, she just got fucked over, and he made a decision. Do I like leave out of protest, or like, you know, I'm sure he was very conflicted.
I would kill for the camera on Jesse while it happened, with him just throwing his arms up over and over and looking around.
I'm sure he was mad. Yeah.
And one of the messy thing about this whole situation is that those who labeled Wendy as having an attitude and believing her own hype, those same people point to this match as being the match where Moolah won over Vince Jr. Like, this was just the proof that Vince was in bed with the right person in the fabulous Moolah. And her loyalty to Vince Jr. was solidified, and their loyalty to each other was solidified. Because I can already see how this is going down. Vince is just like, probably goes to Moolah. Because the part of the reason why people like Moolah and Billy Wolf get power is that, like I said, you have someone like Vince McMahon who's got a million different things he's worried about. He's trying to promote these towns. He's trying to get TV. He's trying to get these advertisers and sponsors. And then what you're going to do for pay-per-view. And all these things are going on. The last thing you want to worry about is like, all right, I need a women's match. I want some different women. Okay, I got to call, but I want a women's tag match as well. So I got to call 4 different women, align them, and then travel. When really, if you want women, I'll just pick up the phone once, go to Moolah, like, hey, I need a tag match. And she goes, all right, I'm going to have so-and-so and so-and-so on this date. All right, good, bye. And that's the end of it.
Yeah.
They just want to make it as simple and as streamlined as possible. That is, when you're building a large entity like WWE, WWF, that is, being able to streamline something like that is a joy.
Especially back then.
Yeah, especially back then, when you're dealing everything over the phone. So the fact that, you know, Moolah has provided this service and was probably one of those people that, like, here is Wendy. Rick presented Wendy to Vince. Vince saw dollar signs and all things he could do, and was just like, okay, Moolah, you hit a home run by bringing this person to me. Thank you so much. And then all of a sudden now she wants more money, and she doesn't want the check to go to Moolah. He goes, oh, now I got to take it. Now I got, instead of just paying Moolah for these women, I now have to pay Moolah for her girls, and I got to pay Wendy, and then what's that going to do? And then I got to deal with this drama, and then do they need different dressing rooms because they're going to get along? I'll just stick with Moolah, and I'll cut this one person out so I can keep this pipeline going. And, you know, for Vince, it's just like, all right, I'll just stick with Moolah because you've made my job easy. And then also, too, like, Vince is probably going to Moolah and having conversations like, you brought this girl to me, and now she's shaking me down.
Yeah.
And then Moolah's like, well, tell you what, why don't we do this? And then probably laid out this whole plan, and Vince is like, I like it. I appreciate you solving this headache of mine. Yeah. So that's where probably Vince's head was at with his entire thing, and probably was like, you know, Moolah, I really appreciate you handling this situation that I had. We've secured the belt, taking care of this, and now we can get this person who's shaking me down for more money, and we can just push him out, and then I'll go forward with you and all of your girls.
Yeah.
With this one, it was a pin screw job, and it looked like shit, and you can see it, and you can't really get around that. But he learned, do a submission screw job. You can just say it was verbal.
Yeah.
You just say, oh yeah. I heard the ref heard him.
After the weird 3 count, there's a big scuffle. I would say half of it is working, and then once the ref hands the belt to Moolah, the other half is for real. Like, she's really taking some swings at Moolah.
The final shot of the match that you see, she is pissed as fuck.
She is staring a hole through the hard cam.
It is amazing.
And apparently Wendy walked to the back, didn't change, grabbed her shit, flew home, and never wrestled for WWF again.
And if you're curious, on the RF video shoot interview, which would have been one of the most interesting parts that could have been of this, when Rob brings it up, Moolah's just kind of like, well, I saw the actual spider lady in the back, and I was like, oh, I'm just going to take your mask. And then, because Wendy wouldn't give me a title shot, and I just went out there, and I won. Jeez. And then Rob doesn't follow up on the 1 count or anything that would have been juicy and interesting, and it's garbage.
Moolah's probably holding a gun at his ball sack. After screwjobbing Wendy, Moolah held the title for 2 years, aside from a 6-day reign by the great Velvet McIntyre during a tour of Australia in '86. However, Sherry Martel would win the title from Moolah July 24th of '87 in a match we discussed on Sherry's episode. And it was also Sherry versus Moolah as team captains at the first ever Survivor Series, with Moolah's team getting the win. So from there, the women's title would be lost to Rockin' Robin, then deactivated, brought back for the Alundra Blaze era, tossed in a trash can, and deactivated until the Attitude Era. And speaking of the Attitude Era, Moolah and her best pal, Mae Young, would essentially be a comedy team. And Mae always crushed it, but I felt like Moolah always kind of felt it was beneath her, which in fairness, almost everything they asked her to do was kind of beneath anybody.
Well, maybe even take a step back. It gets deactivated. Here's maybe conspiracy theory, speculation.
Yeah, let's get into it.
It goes into deactivation. Now, obviously, Moolah is getting up in years. I'm sure Vince is probably like trying to find his next Wendy Richter that's going to play along a little bit better, hence why you're taking swings at Cherry and Rockin' Robin. So you have Moolah, but you don't want Moolah to hold it, but Moolah clearly wants to hold it. Yeah. Do you think that maybe she's like, and Vince is probably tasking her like, oh, when are we going to the next Wendy Richter? Moolah's like, oh, I can't find any girls.
I'm trying really, really hard.
But I could carry the belt for a while, and then Vince really doesn't want that, and probably maybe he realizes like, well, Moolah's not going to let this grapple hold over the title go.
I've made a terrible mistake.
Yeah, a little bit of that, but at the same time too, maybe her priority to find somebody new in women's wrestling is very low, because her as a performer, like, no, I'm the star. You don't need another star. I'm your star. And probably there is that difference of like, all right, well, I guess I got to just move on from all of this. If, Moolah's not willing to let this stranglehold go, and that's probably why you see it just dissipate until they find an Alundra Blaze. Like, oh, we finally found somebody that is extremely attractive, talented in the ring, and let's put her out there. Who can we put her out there against? Crap.
Yeah.
Alundra doesn't have a Rolodex of girls that are in a compound in South Carolina just ready to go.
We had step one nailed.
Now I've got to make 6 different calls to 6 different women. Gosh, it's a lot easier. Screw it. We don't have time for this because I'm going through a steroid trial. And then, you bring it back again with Sable, and you're like, all right, got her on that. Who does she wrestle? Shit, same problem as before. What did we do before? Hey, Moolah's still wrestling. Let's bring her in. So it is that sense of, it was just trying to make it easier. So if there would have been another, not that I would ever wish that there'd be another Billy Wolf, or not that I'd ever wish that another human being quite like Moolah with some of the alleged things she did. If there was another one that Vince could probably call upon, you could have. But because Moolah had such a stranglehold over it and prevented so many other women getting involved, because, you hear stories of women saying, well, I couldn't get any bookings because people would only use Moolah's group of girls. So as Moolah's career is waning, her, feelings towards finding that next star for her bookings is probably pretty low, because she's trying to get herself bookings.
Is it still like that at all today? I mean, I know it's not nearly as bad, but I mean, just with women's wrestlers kind of...
Well, you could take it in the sense of me. I'm focused on my career solely, but I'm definitely on the latter part of it. But I have a lot of students that want to get out there and do things for them. And, I went out and did a lot of things for Cedric because it was very new in my career and I was vibrant about it. But at the same time, too, like, why am I going to go out and get bookings for my students and then go through that whole rigmarole when I'm trying to get myself bookings? So, I mean, I understand that and sense that and explain that as well. But also, too, I'm not holding down an entire genre of professional wrestling from my selfishness for my career.
Also, you're still at a very good, and you're still in great shape. You're still at a reasonable working age. You could do a full run in WWE. Moolah here is like 73-ish. So it's insane that she wouldn't be looking out for the next young star. In fact, she could have managed the next young star, where you could still be like the next star. Like you still have a run in you, and she clearly doesn't. But
her selfishness.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that in a derogatory term. To be a star like Moolah, you have to be very selfish. And you look at just the entire environment she came up in. if she didn't fight for herself,
Yeah, that's true.
every single step of the way through the tremendous amount of abuse, misogyny, and everything that was thrown in front of her path, if she doesn't have those qualities that we are referring to in a negative term, if she doesn't have those qualities, she doesn't survive and thrive like she did. It's one of those things, like you have to be almost messed up and enough of a dick to push yourself forward.
And did you know, Nick, that Rob Feinstein doesn't edit out the weird part where he asks Moolah if she or May want a water, and if they need to go to the bathroom to just let him know. That's in the fucking shoot. That's pretty entertaining.
So if you want an example of how much of kind of an afterthought women's wrestling was in the Attitude Era, at 1999's No Mercy, Moolah faced Ivory for the WWE Women's Championship, and the 76-year-old Moolah won, becoming the oldest women's champion ever.
I don't know. That's a good story.
Yeah.
It's right there. And Ivory's going to give her a good match.
A good 48-second match.
This all right, and everyone who gets all pissy about exposing the business and losing its believability, you have a woman who in her prime wasn't a very good wrestler, who in her prime wasn't physically imposing, now pushing 80 years old, beating probably the best woman in the company at the time, I would say her, Jacqueline. You can't bitch about dick flips and then just accept this. It blows my mind. She did lose the title back 8 days later, but still.
But also, too, something that I had a discussion with a female wrestler one time. I was talking about all of, like, the legends I've wrestled. Talking about wrestling Jerry Lawler and, Kevin Nash and, like... There's so many of them that are flooding through my head right now, but like I would talk about like wrestling all those people, and then like there was a situation like, well, I guess I'll wrestle Jerry the King Lawler again.
Yeah.
And I remember that female wrestler going like, you should be really happy that you get this opportunity to be in this spot, that any time somebody comes off of TV or there's a WWE Hall of Famer that wants to put on the tights one more time, that they want to step in the ring with you, because there is no female equivalent. Medusa's not wrestling. A lot of the female wrestlers that a lot of girls grew up watching don't wrestle anymore. You don't see Lita anymore wrestling unless it's in WWE. There's no girls that were of a high popularity wrestling on the indie scene. Like, that's just not happening. So a lot of females are not getting the opportunity to wrestle some of their heroes, which is something that I have done 10, 20, 30 times over. And for someone like Ivory to wrestle somebody like the fabulous Moolah, that's a big deal. That's something that she probably would have pushed for. And also, too, it's a great story. So when I watched this match growing up as a kid, I bought it. I'm like, okay, yeah, that's pretty cool. Like, as a wrestling fan at that time, I was like, yeah, that's a good story. That's cool. And then now with the hindsight of probably the way Ivory feels about it, like, probably is like, man, I got to wrestle the fabulous Moolah.
I can see that, and that is neat. But there has to be a cutoff. And it's not like it was like a one-off match. It was like a major pay-per-view for the title. Like, if Jordan came back to the NBA right now, I believe he could probably start on some teams because he's Michael Jordan. And I guess kayfabe-wise, that was Moolah. But Michael's also, 50, 52 or something? Like, if Julius Erving came back to the NBA, he should not have a roster spot, no matter how good he was. Or Larry Bird. It's like there has to be like an age cutoff to keep it believable.
Well, I would disagree with that. I'm going to disagree with that hard, because I wrestled a match with Sergeant Slaughter, who I believe was 72 at the time.
Jeez,
wow.
And it was a weekend where he had a Friday and Saturday show, and I was wrestling him both nights. And one of my favorite things of my entire wrestling career was Sergeant Slaughter, like, kind of saw I'd wrestled him before, but it was very proto Man Scout era. And when I wrestled him this weekend, where we were wrestling on a Friday and a Saturday, it was very much more refined. So I was doing some of my stuff, and then he was interacting, and usually he's just there for the hot tag and comes in and does, Cobra Clutch, and he's good, and that's it. I'll never forget him walking in on that Saturday after we kind of wrestled. He kind of seen my character. As soon as he walked in, he walked right over to me on that Saturday, and he goes, "I've got a spot I want to do with you." At 72 years old, this man was excited because he saw something in me the night before and then thought about a spot he could do with me the next night. And just having that flair for it and love for it and seeing somebody who's young and like, I want to do something with you because I like what you got going on. To me, that is the highest compliment I ever could have got from him. I mean, that's far more than him just giving a thumbs up, like, good match. It was fun to wrestle with you. But for him to come up like, I want to do a spot with you, and it only works with you. Yeah. Like that.
What was the
means a lot.
spot? Do you remember? Because I'm really fucking curious.
It was it didn't work that well. But it was just like I go to give him a shoulder tackle and he doesn't bump, and I go to throw a punch. It was just one of the things where he just stood there like Superman.
Just no-sold everything.
Yeah, no-sold everything, and it kind of came off a little weird because at the same time too, like I don't want to like shoulder tackle him that hard because I don't want him to actually fall down. Because like if I go in and shoulder tackle somebody, I'm bringing it regardless. Especially if we're gonna do a spot where you're not going down. It's usually like from a bigger man that I'm gonna get in there. But you're 72 years old, and I'm trying to navigate not hurting you because I don't want to be the guy that hurts you. So I'm sure Ivory felt the same exact way by wrestling the Fabulous Moolah, because saying that you're going to wrestle the Fabulous Moolah on pay-per-view for the title is like saying you're going to wrestle Hulk Hogan for the title on pay-per-view. I can't think of a wrestler that's going to turn that down. But I can't think of a wrestling promoter that would say no to it.
But as a wrestling fan, I didn't like it.
And also, I would just like to say, with Jake's point, I don't remember Moolah trying anything interesting or creative or anything in all her shit. So, Sergeant Slaughter, fucking A, still trying to be an artist, but Moolah was just like, man, I'm in Colombia.
I think that may be the difference, because Slaughter has this aura of believability where all he has to do is catch your ass in that Cobra Clutch, and he's putting you out. Or like, or like someone like Bruno, who probably could have wrestled to the day he died because he looked like $1 million into his 70s. Moolah was clearly elderly at this point. Like she didn't wear it well,
But tough as nails.
I mean, she was still out there doing it. I'll give it to her.
Tough as nails. Like but that's the way she always was. Even in her prime, and she was just as tough as shoe leather.
Yeah,
and sure, at times in her life, she looked like shoe leather.
The joke's right there.
It's right there. I had to say it, but it's just this idea. Here's this tough woman that's going to take this young little thing and just throw her around. Like there's that aspect to it, and she's always had that through her entire career, so it's not much of a leap now at 70 to do the same thing.
So into the 2000s, Moolah would make sporadic appearances with WWE, with her last ever being at SummerSlam August 2007 in a backstage segment with Vince and William Regal. Just months later, Ellison died November 2nd, 2007 at the age of 84 in Columbia, South Carolina. According to her daughter, the possible cause of death was a heart attack or a blood clot related to a shoulder replacement surgery she had. That's Moolah's career, and this is where we normally give our final thoughts and end the show. Holy fuck, we can't do that with Moolah, because pro wrestling isn't even half of what there is to talk about with her. So, on June 24th, 1995, Fabulous Moolah was the first female wrestler inducted into the Hall of Fame. And whether you love or hate her, think she was good or bad in the ring, there's no denying that she deserved it. That was hard to say. She had a long career, and whether it was by her own design or stranglehold on the business, she was the champion for most of it. To my knowledge, no one protested her getting into the Hall of Fame, but this was pre-internet, pre-social media, and pre-Moolah's dark side coming to light. In March of 2018, WWE announced the Fabulous Moolah Memorial Battle Royal for WrestleMania 34, and the internet lost its shit. People lost their minds so much that the WrestleMania sponsor, Snickers, pressured WWE to change it. Have a Snickers, Moolah. You ruin women's lives when you're hungry. That's that commercial they do.
I know. She should just give it to all the people that she fucked up, and then they'd be happy.
Which is, it's so funny that all of that came to all this backlash of Moolah. I'll say came out of nowhere, but it is justified. Because for the longest time when people talked about the Fabulous Moolah, and I've been in the room and edited even more shoot interviews. And anytime the Fabulous Moolah's name came up, the words that were always used were shrewd businesswoman.
Yeah.
That was what everybody said, shrewd businesswoman. And there was always that sense of respect. There was always that sense of, oh, she's a shrewd businesswoman. She's got things that she wants to do and how she wants to do it. And there's a little bit of a smile to people, but they also kind of know, like, yep, I would not want to deal with that woman when it comes to business. And that was anything as far as it would go. There was not like say, oh, she was fucking these girls over. There was never anything like that whatsoever that was brought up. It was always shrewd businesswoman.
So there's like talking points going through the business. It was a talking point. Oh, Moolah, shrewd businesswoman. It's just like on fucking the news.
Yeah, like anytime her name came up, that's what everybody consensus always said about her. Nobody ever said abusive, never said that she did those girls wrong. Even sometimes when we talk to other females, they're like, oh, Moolah, like, I love her to death, but for God's sake, she was tough to deal with. Like that's what I always heard, and that was the rap on her. So the idea that everybody's like, fuck her, like, and just she's a pimp and all these others, it was very much kind of out of nowhere.
Yeah, it's that wording when you hear stuff like that and you hear people say things such as that in life where you're like, oh, there's a whole can of worms here that they don't want to get into, and they're just going to say this and we're going to move on by for now.
Well, that's the thing about the term shrewd businessman or businesswoman. It's not like a blow through. It's always like Andrew Carnegie, shrewd businessman, used child labor to make his still industry. Like it's not like good things. When that label gets thrown around, it's usually some dark shit behind it.
Yeah, like Thomas Edison. No, shrewd businessman.
Stole half his shit and ruined lives. Yeah.
You know,
shrewd businessman.
Yeah, and that's basically what the country's been built off of. So, you know, Moolah is no different than Andrew Carnegie and Thomas Edison.
But Moolah didn't kill an elephant, so can we give her that?
Well, we'll see. We'll get to that when we get to that, okay?
Oh, yeah, the elephant boy, I forgot. Oh, fuck.
So that leaves the question, what about the Fabulous Moolah could be so bad? What could this sweet old Southern belle, pro wrestling's grandmother, possibly do that would be so bad? So we mentioned earlier that Moolah got into training and booking. First with her husband, Johnny Long, and they were able to get their stable booked through Jack Pfeffer. And to my knowledge, not many bad things come out of this era. But it was when Moolah split with not just Jack Pfeffer, but also Johnny Long, that things seemed to change. Moolah began training wrestlers with her new husband, Buddy Lee. By the late 1950s, Billy Wolf was out of business, leaving Moolah and Buddy Lee free to take over the entire women's wrestling industry.
I was always told that Moolah trained the girls from the right side as opposed to the left side, so that way all of her girls could only wrestle with her girls. Wow. And they couldn't break out and wrestle other girls.
Wow.
So if a promoter only wanted, like, all right, I just want so-and-so, I'll get two girls from Moolah and I'll get two of these other girls or two local girls, I'll book them and bring them in. They wouldn't work well because they'd be working opposite sides of the body. So that's how Moolah kind of ensured her stranglehold over female wrestling, was train these girls a certain way, which was opposite to what most people were going to train. So if like a guy found a woman, gave her some wrestling training, and then went out there and put her in a ring with one of Moolah's girls, the match would be shit. And then, of course, the guy would be like, well, it's most certainly not Moolah's girl's fault because
Yep.
Moolah's got this reputation. This girl just started. She's just the shit's because of that. Now it's very fluid and everybody's all trained from the same side and it's a little bit universal and transfers very easily. But that was what I always heard about Moolah. She trained the girls a specific way so they could only wrestle each other.
That's fucking crazy.
Yeah, and that's usually that's something I always heard, like after they would say, oh, shrewd businesswoman. And this is one of the things that they did.
So with Billy Wolf out of the picture and having close ties to the McMahons, it was at this moment Fabulous Moolah held women's wrestling's infinity gauntlet in her hand. She could have been change and positivity. She could have pushed for equality. She had a chance to break the will, but she chose to become a spoke on it. And to me, that makes her even worse for all these things we're about to get into. Sure, Billy Wolf was an evil tyrant, but at least under him, women's wrestling was like really good. On par, if not better, than a lot of the men's matches of the era, to today's standards. While Moolah would preach the hair-pulling, slap-fighting bullshit that would make it even easier for promoters to degrade women's wrestling.
But also, too, that could be an artistic choice. I think, Billy Wolf was training these women to wrestle
like men.
Yeah, like men, and obviously like their matches could be just as good as the men because they have a large repertoire. Where like Moolah probably was like, let's just make it easy. Let's just make it all hair pulling, and then make it clearly different. So that way, when they book the women, their matches look different than the men. So when you book my girls, you're going to get this. And also, too, if you're a misogynist man, you're like, oh, these girls just are hair pulling and cat fighting around and just doing hair mirrors and throwing you around by the hair. They're going to like, yeah, this is more of what I want to see out of my female wrestling as opposed to them doing drop kicks and cross bodies and head scissors. Like, I already got dudes that can do that. So if you're a misogynist man, you're like, yeah, Moolah gets it.
She's a bitch. I like her.
Yeah, she gets the type of female wrestling I want as well.
And we also talked about, back when like Ethel and Mildred, when they were doing it, they were talking about they were main event and they were selling fucking places out.
Yeah.
They were doing business. But all the research that I saw, like Cornette talks about how like Moolah back then, they were part of the act. They were part of the show. Moolah wasn't main event and shit. They weren't bringing in people because she wasn't putting butts in seats, as Jim said.
Well, also too, like I'm sure Mildred Burke and Billy Wolf and the trainers that they had in their camp were probably better than Moolah. And Moolah just saw this formula of the female wrestler who is the champion, and then you have the man who's a wrestler, and then they run things, and the man opens doors, but you're really kind of running stuff, and you're also the champion. And I'm sure Moolah's husband was not the businessman that Billy Wolf was, but he was obviously the same type of man that was sleeping with the women.
He was a piece of shit too.
So Moolah's like, well, I'll have to take over more of the Billy Wolf role and the Mildred Burke role here. So she's just trying to see that she saw the formula on how to do that. And you'd be that one phone call that people wanted to just make when they wanted female wrestlers. And it always comes back to, I've been listening to a lot of Disgraceland podcast, and they always talk about artists coming from damaged childhood backgrounds, and then they grow up to be a piece of shit. And at the same time, too, it's not being said to, excuse them for their behavior, but at least it explains it. And you look at, if Moolah came up during this time and seeing how it was done, and she was clearly trying to copy the same formula that Billy Wolf and Mildred Burke had, copied it to a T, and then put her own little abusive spin on it at the end of the day.
And you see it in Moolah's book, too. She grew up poor, and from a very early age, she was like, I don't like being poor. I'm not going to be poor. She found her formula. The money started coming in, and it was like, fuck yeah, I will never be poor again.
And I feel that fucking sentiment 1,000%. Like I have been homeless. I have been on food stamps. And now that I sit myself in a little bit decent position, a couple things have come up that have threatened some things in my life. And I can't tell you the drastic measures that I would even go to ensure that my bills are paid and things are taken care of and the money continues to roll in. Now, granted, because I hate myself enough, most of the abuse and punishment is being put on me and not other innocent individuals, but there is still abuse and punishment, but I am absorbing all of those blows.
What we're saying is, if me and Nick disappeared, check Jake's backyard.
Let's get into the Moolah compound. The women who trained with Moolah lived on her property, so not only did they have to pay for training, they had to pay for room and board. That seems reasonable, right? However, Moolah made them stay on the property. If you wanted to be a women's wrestler, you were forced to pay Moolah rent, and that's where it gets kind of sketch. On top of that, for any woman that walked into Moolah's school in Columbia, South Carolina, Moolah owned them. Moolah could tell them what to wear, how to cut their hair, who they could hang out with, who they could be friends with. She even tried to control their sexuality, which we'll get into later. Then there's the booking. Moolah took 25% off of all the earnings if you were lucky. There are tons of girls that claim 35, 50%. And it's commonplace for bookers, agents, managers to take, 10% when they're getting you jobs that you wouldn't have gotten without them. That, again, seems very reasonable. But sometimes Moolah wouldn't tell the girls she was doing this. Judy Martin and Leilani Kai, who are both huge Moolah apologists, by the way, said that Moolah would collect the women's pay from the promoters, take a chunk of it for herself, and then tell the girls that the remainder was all they got paid.
I mean, the booking fee is something that's been around for a long period of time, and I've justified it time and time again. And a lot of people that I know have taken, like George South was always told that he was taking a booking fee out, and as George is always sworn up and down, he goes, I told them ahead of time, because George would always be like, look, I rented a 20 passenger van, 10 passenger van when WWF wanted extra talent for WWF superstars. They called me and they said they wanted 8, 12, 15 guys. I picked you out of everybody else. I put you in the van and I drove you. You sat in the back and you slept. I drove you to the WWF locker room and put you in the locker room with Razor Ramon, Macho Man, whoever, and you're back here. I've given you an opportunity to wrestle on TV and be in the ring with some of these guys, and you will get paid, but I'm gonna need to take a little bit out, and I'm gonna make money off that. I will be making a profit off some of this money that I'm taking. It's not all gonna be like the money that I'm taking out is gonna cover solely just the van and then that's it. No. I'm making the money because it's my reputation. Because when one of you guys screw up, walk in the wrong door that you're not supposed to, know what happens? I'm the one that gets yelled at. They don't yell at you, they yell at me. So I will justify the booking fee. Now, obviously, taking it behind people's back is not ideal. Being upfront about it is ideal, and being the person that secures them being there. Now, none of these women were allowed to talk to promoters. None of these women were really allowed to leave. And back to the story of controlling who they can hang out with. I forget the woman's name. It was which female wrestler it was, but she was telling me a story about living on Moolah's compound, and she was dating Larry Zbyszko at the time, and Moolah fucking hated Larry Zbyszko, mostly because he was dating one of her female wrestlers. Yeah. So she saw it as, oh, she's gonna hook up with Larry, then Larry's gonna get her bookings, and then she's not going to be underneath my control. So Larry pulled up at the compound to pick up this said female professional wrestler, and he pulled in with his Cadillac. It was like a brand new Cadillac, and he pulled in, and he was kind of like the nose of the car was just kind of in the garage a little bit, but not all the way in the garage, but just like halfway in a little bit, because he was just running in and saying hello, is so and so here, and then she gets in the car and they take off. Well, Moolah saw him pull in, and she hit the garage door button, so the garage door came down on his new fucking Cadillac. Because she's like, fuck him.
And in my research, here, I'll read this. Wrestling Classics message board, dude named Crimson Mask, he mentions how Vern Gagne used to take a percentage of his trainees' wages. In Ric Flair's case, he had to get Wahoo McDaniel to speak with Vern for that to get discontinued. Buddy Rogers fired his manager, Jack Pfeffer, in 1951 because Rogers realized he could negotiate more money than Pfeffer could, and Pfeffer was taking 35%. And as Crimson put it, because he'd say it better than me, bottom line, it was kind of standard practice back then, but with Moolah's power and control, the girls probably got fucked worse.
Yeah, and that's the thing, too. It even happens at the top. Like I was mentioning at the beginning of this podcast, yeah, you're a part of Capital Wrestling, but so-and-so runs Philadelphia. and then so-and-so runs Pittsburgh. And all of those people, they make their money, but they got to kick up to Vince Sr. for using the name Capital Wrestling. Yeah. So everybody, even the top people, the promoter of the town, the guy who secured the building, he's got to give a cut to the guy at the top. And then I'm sure the guy at the top, he's got to pay for state athletic commissions, and he's got to deal with all those other things, the promotion for his town as well. So everybody's kicking up, and cuts are happening. So
not like the mafia at all.
Yeah. So all of these things, everybody's got to pay a cut. Everybody's got to pay a percentage of everything. So Moolah taking money from these female wrestlers is going completely under the radar for so long because everybody's got to kick up to somebody.
But I can understand the percentage thing. It's the not knowing that is the issue.
Yeah,
like,
agreed.
When my girlfriend Spencer Taylor signed a contract to write for ABC's Mixed-ish this fall on ABC, she knew her manager was going to take 10% of that because without her manager, she's not writing for ABC. And that is the agreement. That's why it's profitable for Moolah to book these girls. Pump out 50 girls a night so that you get 50 commission checks. You know, it's just the sneakiness is what's frowned upon. And plus the percentage. I mean, half is that's a lot.
I mean, that is the thing, is that she's not disclosing this. Like, if she had a camp and she was going to train these girls and had it clearly laid out, this is the contract, these are the agreements.
You don't like it, don't be a wrestler.
Exactly. These are my terms and conditions.
Yeah.
And at the same time, too, how many people just click the terms and conditions of iTunes every single time? So she probably views it as that. Like, listen, I told you ahead of time that I was going to do this and I was going to do this, but yeah, she probably wasn't as specific. And of course, I'm sure that percentage moved around a couple of times. And also, too, let's all, not to defend Moolah too much, but some of these girls could have over-exaggerated, like, you took 50% of my money, because I can't tell you how many times pro wrestlers like, I deserve more. Yeah. There is a little bit of that. At the same time, too, I think there's a longer history of Moolah kind of moving the goalpost multiple times.
And we're talking about all these other promotions that mostly involve male wrestlers, and it wasn't pretty much a fucking monopoly, which if you weren't with Moolah and if you weren't doing that, you didn't have too many other options, like try to hit up different territories. I mean, Moolah knew her powers, so she had more of a fucking hold and more of an ability to abuse it.
And since Moolah controlled booking, if you had anything to say about it, she'd just stop booking you. Even worse, Moolah would stop booking people that were getting over. Anyone that could possibly become a threat to Moolah's stardom, girls that promoters were maybe asking for a little too often, Moolah would just stop giving them spots. So, if Moolah was so bad, why didn't the girls just leave? There are a couple of explanations. A, literally nowhere else to go. If you wanted to wrestle, you were a woman, you worked for Moolah. And B, since the girls were barely getting paid, they had a serious debt to Moolah over training fees, living expenses, food. Mad Maxine said that due to owing Moolah both rent and training fees up to $1,500, the trainees went into debt and she controlled their lives. Debbie Johnson, another former trainee of Moolah's, said that since she was giving Moolah 30% of her booking fee and the rest of her paycheck basically went to living expenses, food, rent, utilities, Debbie worked for Moolah for 2 years before she even got paid money. So all that, I would say, is arguably very true and provable. Toss in the screw job and Moolah, at best, kind of a scumbag. But here is where the story of Fabulous Moolah not only gets arguably subjective and incredibly controversial, it gets very fucking dark. So over the years, various female wrestlers have come forward with stories accusing Moolah of being a pimp. Now, when you hear pimp, maybe you think of the Godfather in a silly feather hat. But if the rumors of Moolah are true, she was a sex trafficker, accessory to rape, and the Fabulous Moolah deserved to die in prison. To Moolah's defenders, I'll say this. Just because someone treated you fairly or was kind to your face, it doesn't mean they're not capable of being a monster. Cosby was a role model to generations. Serial killers live normal lives. They make small talk at work. They hold doors open for old ladies. And the double life is part of their whole shtick. And I will say a lot of Moolah's defenders were close to her. It's people that not only would she have not targeted, it's people who directly or indirectly, knowingly or unknowingly, would have benefited from Moolah's underhanded tactics. We brought up on Luna's episode that in a 2002 interview, Luna Vachon said that at 16 years old, Moolah sent her out of state to be photographed by an older man. And although she remained clothed during the photo shoot, Vachon said that she felt taken advantage of by Moolah and this older man.
Peggy Lee Leather, who is one of the people that Nigel Sherrod interviewed, who I still want to understand why he defends Moolah so much. Peggy, in one of those interviews, said, oh yeah, Dr. Goldstein, he liked wrestling, he liked the girls, and she makes him seem like a nice situation. But just like he liked wrestling, he liked the girls, that's a red flag as fuck for me. The way Peggy put it, it was just an open offer. If you wanted to go, you could. It was all fun, Nick. I mean, it could have been, but you never fucking know. Those situations are just.
Luna also stated that her aunt Vivian Vachon witnessed Moolah having sex with a lot of the female trainees. And, if it were just two consenting women having some sex, who gives a shit? But one of the main problems with that is Sandy Parker, who was trained by Moolah, was a lesbian. And she claimed that Moolah wouldn't allow her to date women and attempted to force her to date men. Parker said this enraged her because, quote, because Moolah was two-faced because she had her little dalliances that we all knew about. And there were more rumors of Moolah having lesbian affairs. If they were consensual, who gives a fuck? But Moolah publicly was an unapologetic homophobe. And if she was secretly having gay sex, she missed the boat on becoming a Republican senator.
Oh.
And then there's rumors of Moolah forcing her girls to sleep with promoters and others. Penny Banner said, quote, let's get this out of the way first so I don't have to dance around the subject. Moolah was a pimp. From her sprawling 42-acre estate in Columbia, South Carolina, Moolah would send her half-trained underage female wrestlers to photo shoots. That would be, by today's standards, considered pedophilia and pornography. She sent trainees to wrestling promoters in set numbers, renting them out in bulk, with the understanding that the girls would have sex with the promoter and the wrestlers on the roster who wanted them. Promoters liked free sex, but what they also liked was for the boys to not go outside looking for it and possibly running into trouble. Sex on the road with a steady and pliant group of semi-attracted women in return for money is what Moolah offered. The women were sent out on these tours and were not told about this arrangement ahead of time. They found out on the road. Those that refused to have sex with the promoters and wrestlers were raped. Now, if you watch the Vice thing on Moolah, you saw Princess Victoria, who clearly stated Moolah sent her out to a guy in a clear attempt to pimp her out. And apparently Victoria just turns it down. But the attempt was clearly made. And then she turns around and chastises people for calling Moolah a pimp.
It makes no sense. It's one of the weirdest parts of the whole fucking thing. I don't understand this.
And I can't.
So she couldn't be called a prostitute.
Exactly.
I know, but she lays out the entire reason why she does. Like, it makes no fucking sense. She basically told a story of a story we could pass on, but then she says to quit spreading fucking rumors.
Never mind. I can't speak for any of these women, but mentally, when you're a victim, it changes you. There are some victims that refuse to admit it, the pain, the shame of all of it, so they lash out with anger or tears. Like, look at cults, look at studies of people in long-term mental and physical abuse. People, they don't want to feel duped, and they usually deny it and get very angry when it's brought up, which, if you watch the Vice thing, a common theme. We will end with the most notorious and brutal accusation against Moolah in the case of Susie Mae McCoy, known as Sweet Georgia Brown. And I'm more inclined to believe this one because out of all of them, Georgia Brown was a black woman in the South in the 50s and 60s. If someone was going to be seen as less than by Moolah or anyone else, it would sadly be Georgia. So Georgia Brown was trained and booked by Moolah and her husband, Buddy Lee. If you remember from our episode on Babs, Marva, and Ethel, African-American women were showstoppers in the 50s. Headliners, big draws. Sweet Georgia Brown was no different. She rose to stardom in the territories. She was booked strongly. She made a ton of money, and there was Moolah there to scoop it up. It was said that Moolah would give Georgia alcohol and drugs in an intentional attempt to make her addicted so she could control her. Georgia was regularly beaten, and Brown told her daughter that she was often raped. It's believed that Buddy Lee is the father of one, if not more, of Georgia's kids, and Georgia was reportedly forced into sexual acts with promoters. She'd often come back off the road pregnant. She left the wrestling industry in 1972, broke financially and mentally, traumatized by her years with Moolah. Georgia Brown would spend the rest of her life in fear of relationships with men and white people. She'd spend the rest of her life desperately trying to piece back together some semblance of normalcy, while Moolah thrived in WWF, unabashedly leaving a trail of broken women and broken dreams in her wake.
Sweet Georgia Brown's son, Michael McCoy, is an interesting person. He shows up on the Dark Sides of the Ring documentary, and he has a statement where he's like, I have no reason not to believe anything that I heard. But then there's a Nigel Sharaj YouTube interview where his basic stance is that he met Moolah, and the person that I met wouldn't do that. The person that I met was kind and nice, and there's no way she could have done that. And this is the type of thinking that drives me fucking nuts. That if one person is nice to you, that they couldn't have done anything horrible. Like Nick said, people like this have certain ways they know how to exploit, they know how to handle it. And it's crazy how easily someone can be kind of manipulated just by offering them food or a drink or just being fucking kind to them. And I mean, I know Michael's got his own things to go through, so I don't really know. But it was weird to see his YouTube interview that was kind of just defending the shit out of Moolah just because she was nice.
That's a situation I'm going through right now. A guy who I worked very closely with, who I considered a friend, came out that he was charged with 5 counts of sexual assault on a minor. He's already pled guilty, and the wheels of justice have already turned. But he would have been the last person in the world that I would have guessed would be doing anything that salacious, that dark, that wrong, because he was a nice, hardworking individual who I felt was very similar to myself. And that's fucking scary. So if your justification for Moolah not being a dirtbag is because she was nice to you is incorrect. And what people do behind closed doors is completely different. And you can only hope for the best that when you meet somebody that they're not something as dark and angry. And this is something that this podcast recording comes up in a weekend where I have to debate all of this. So it's very, very raw for me in my mind. And just to kind of take some of the points that you discussed and some of this abuse that we've talked about here in this section, starting backwards, with Sweet Georgia Brown. I remember when we did the episode with Ethel and Babs, and I talked to George South, as I always do for every episode that we do. The name Sweet Georgia Brown came up when I was talking about African-American female wrestlers in the South. He brought up Sweet Georgia Brown, and just the look on his face, he goes, nobody will ever know all of the things that she had to go through just to be a professional wrestler. And she was the nicest person I ever met. But I could see that she was going through a tremendous amount of strife and abuse.
Damn.
I've never seen him just, normally he's very jovial. He's always feels like he's doing a bit of some sort. But when I brought up her name, it was like stone serious. So I don't know what he's heard or know, and he would never share with me. The accusations of Moolah sleeping with some of her students. As you said, Nick, if it's consensual, fine, great. And I always heard that Moolah and May, they were a couple. Oh. I always heard that, and I've heard many female wrestlers that were like, say the words like, well, if it doesn't work out with this guy and it doesn't work out with you and your guy, let's just run off and be Moolah and Mae Young. Because we'll just live in South Carolina and we'll be together. We'll be like the Golden Girls. That was commonplace.
Yeah.
And then also too, if you're not required to date men, unless you're on the road and being paid to. you know, and you're stuck on this compound. You're gonna bond with these. It's almost like prison in a sense. So you have these other attractive females with good bodies. That just kind of happens.
Yeah.
And, you know, if Moolah saw that, like, oh, these girls are buddying up and they can gang up against me, she could probably use sex to be created as a wedge. And it all comes back to a power dynamic. And that's another sense of control, you know, but we don't want to think about that. And then the accusations of, you know, taking pictures for this guy or this guy. This is all pre-Twitter. This is all pre-social media. As we know from Jordan Grace's 2-volume book series of DMs from a female professional wrestler. Female wrestlers are contacted directly and offered to do weird and gross shit all the time. All the time. So in a world where that doesn't exist, where you can get a direct line to these girls, oh, but wait, we have a direct line in a woman by the name of the fabulous Moolah. So I'm sure a lot of those requests ended up on Moolah's desk, and being the person who is obsessed with money and profit, and this guy is offering money for acts, pictures, whatever gross things. I mean, I wouldn't even put it past her if some guy was like, hey, I would really like the socks of Penny Banner, that maybe some girl's socks came up missing from time to time, certain pieces of gear, boots. Oh, you want to take pictures of the girls? Like, I can only imagine the things that would come up. And also, too, you know, some of these girls are defenders. You know, some of these girls that I know that get these offers laugh it off and like, all right, you want pictures of my feet? $100. PayPal comes in for $100. All right, you get pictures of my feet.
It's feet.
I've assisted girls in taking pictures of their feet so they could go make that money.
Did you get a cut?
No, I just did it because I'm a friend. I would never get a cut.
That was a joke.
I know it was a joke.
To that point, I'd say that if it was a consensual contract, I don't even care if it was full-blown prostitution. If a guy was like, I'll give you $1,000, we're gonna bang, the girl says, all right, whatever, but that's fine, whatever. Yeah. It's like the booking fee thing. Did they know they were being shipped off to Arizona or whatever?
Absolutely, and that's where it gets a little sketchy. And I always fucking hated this comment from the Honky Tonk Man. He always said that...
Which one?
I like where this is going.
He used to say that the only reason that females were in the business was so they could have sex with the boys. So it's, you know, like, I'm sure there were some women that when Moolah was like, I need you to go take care of the promoter, they're like, shoot, great, love it. Yeah. Sounds like a plan. But then there are women there, like we detailed at the beginning, they were like, hey, I'm just trying to provide for my family. Yeah. I'm just trying to make some money. I'm not here to fuck anybody. For fuck's sake. Like, I know I'm attractive and there, and it might be one of the more attractive girls in the entire camp, or like whatever of the 4 girls, like this one girl that wants nothing to do with it, that just happens to be that guy's favorite type of girl. Yeah. And she's like, no, but you can sleep with these other 3. They clearly are willing. I don't want to be involved. And that's where it always comes in as well. It's taking people's dreams and leveraging it into stuff they don't want to do. And as a person, you have to decide what you want to do. Because I know some women that have reluctantly took pictures of their feet because they're like, well, I gotta fucking eat. I gotta make that fucking money. Because at the time that I was assisting this girl to take pictures of her feet, bookings were not that great. It's like, well, I can make money right now, and I can go take care of my car right now if I do this. Yep. So I'm just going to go get this money and go do this. I really don't want to do this. I just want to be a wrestler. I would like to be a wrestler and be respected, but fuck, I got to go do this. And now there's a whole generation of girls that don't have to, because there's all kinds of opportunities. And I'm thankful for that they don't get to see that darker side of wrestling, because really they're only 1 or 2 generations removed from that. I would say only 1 generation removed from that. Girls from NXT and some of the better indie girls right now are just 1 generation removed from having to resort to methods like that to make money. And I'm not saying that pervs just came out of nowhere. They've been around for a very, very long time. And we're just talking about stuff that's reported and that these girls knew about. Like I'm saying, maybe there was a pair of socks or two that went missing, a pair of underwear that went missing. That makes it even darker and even seedier. And we're just discussing the big stuff, not to mention the littler stuff that I can only imagine happening, because I understand perverts because they've approached me as well. So I get it. It's gross.
All right. Final thoughts on the fabulous Moolah.
Well, I've spent moments in this episode defending her and her actions. I've spent moments explaining. I've spent moments condemning. And that is just the muddled history of the fabulous Moolah. And I think that's worth a deep dive debate. Maybe me and Jim Cornette can argue about that as opposed to other things in professional wrestling, on whether or not Moolah was good for professional wrestling and female professional wrestling most specifically. Answer is I don't know. When I now will hear people say, oh, Moolah, shrewd businesswoman, I know that there's a much darker cloud over that, as opposed to somebody who was smart and saw an opportunity and took it when it was an entrepreneur. I think I now will look upon that phrase as a talking point for something much, much, much darker.
I can't begin to imagine her struggle as a woman in wrestling in the time period she was part of. I can't relate to it. I can't understand it. And I'm sure her life was very difficult, from losing her mother at an early age to getting the humanity crushed out of her by the industry. I can try to give Moolah her dues for keeping women's wrestling afloat and for giving women jobs. But even if 0% of her accusations were true, from the money to the sex crimes, the art of women's wrestling still suffered under her watch. Like we mentioned, the in-ring ability in the Mildred Burke, Ethel Johnson days was far superior than 90% of the women who came out of Moolah's school, which I don't want to hate on those women who were trained by Moolah. They were trained by Moolah. It's not their fault. They still worked hard. They still took the bumps, broke the bones, the blood, the sweat, the tear. They were just part of a system that failed them. Like, Moolah was never a great wrestler, and I think that's part of why she wanted a stranglehold on the industry. She was never going to rise to the top with her ability. Now, even if some of Moolah's accusations are true, which I personally believe some, if not all of them are, she is one of, if not the most vile, evil human beings to be part of pro wrestling, Chris Benoit included. She is deplorable. She is wicked. And I feel bad for her victims, because that's what the women who showed up to her school in Columbia are, victims. You can even take away all the crazy rape and pimp rumors. At her best, Moolah destroyed careers and she destroyed lives. Fuck WWE for considering to honor her. Fuck Vince for giving her a lifetime of wealth and power. Fuck you if you defend her. Pro wrestling and the world is a better place with Lillian Ellison's bones in the ground.
It's weird because Moolah is really fucking nice. If you see, I watched the Wrestling Talk public access show, all 45 fucking minutes of it, and I was seriously laughing to myself because I was like, Moolah's really fucking nice. And I get it, because people are so easily fucking won over. They're so easily won over because sometimes they just don't want to believe it, or they just don't have the ability to. They haven't experienced enough or learned enough about people to know that you can smile in someone's face and stab them in the fucking back and then grind it in. I think Moolah had a lot of kind words from old-timers, men back in the day, because that's not who she took advantage of. Moolah had her women, and she knew how to control them, and the men respected the fuck out of her because she was getting paid in a business that was run by 99% dicks, and Moolah was crushing it. So, of course, Tommy Rich is going to defend her and say, oh, she wasn't a pimp, she was a businesswoman. And my whole first thought on that was like, isn't being a pimp straight up business? Yeah, there's some things we didn't even touch on. Like, look up the article about her daughter Mary, who Moolah had a warrant out for child abuse when she was 15, saying that she was wrestling with a fucking burst appendix. Then go on Nigel's interviews and listen to Mary talk about it, because she does say it was all a big mix-up, and that just sounds... I mean, it goes back to the whole thing of she's made peace with her mom. She loves her now, but just like back then... Probably, yeah, some fucked up stuff happened, and she even admits it. She talks about how she did know she was second to wrestling. And it's just these little things that pop up more and more when I was doing research that I found out. And then looking at everything, seriously, go to Nigel's page, listen to all the other interviews with the women that defend her. Because I'm big on getting both sides of the story, because I do think people just jump on shit. But it comes down to, I don't trust fucking Nigel at all. Every little thing that is said negatively about Moolah, he will defend to his dying day. I will not believe someone who says someone is the greatest fucking person in the world and says everything nice they did, every decision they made was good, and I don't trust the fucking person that says someone was pure fucking shit and never did anything good, because you clearly have an agenda and you are not going to put one little 1% of saying that they were 1% good or 1% bad. It's so obvious that he has an agenda. It's fucking weird. But I mean, there's lots of women that do defend her and say even like the compound and the rent and all this stuff wasn't true. And just look all the research that I went through. I think that Moolah with Buddy Lee, because there are people that can even make the argument that the Sweet Georgia Brown stuff was only with Buddy Lee and it wasn't around Moolah's time. But I think Moolah took advantage of the girls back in the day. I think she knew it was easier to get away with. I think there's less ability, there's less press. Clearly there was not internet. There wasn't really internet in the 80s, but word would travel easier. It would get around. And I think once probably some word started getting spread, Moolah knew she had to tighten up her ship. And she knew throughout the 80s, I think Mad Maxine might be the only exception who talked shit about her in the 80s. But I think all the other ones, you look back and it's like 70s, 60s, and I think it was a whole lot easier back then. And Moolah knew it, and when she had to be good, she did. And one of the things I'm most shocked about is how Moolah didn't end up in a fucking John Waters movie, because with line delivery and shitty charisma, on par with Mink Stole, Moolah just, God, she was so boring. Can I just fucking get across how boring she fucking was? But she would have killed it in a John Waters movie. And Nick, did you know that Moolah would like that water now?
All right, that is our episode on Fabulous Moolah. We are at timbellpot.com, timbellpot on all the social media. You can find me at Nick Olesa on the social medias. Man Scout Manning on all the social medias for Jake. Micah is JTrotter27 on the Twitters.
Yay.
You can support our podcast by donating to our Patreon, which I will still 35% of. Or you can support us for free by leaving us a rating and review wherever you're listening to this. You know there is some percentage of a chance literally none of this is true, and she was a fucking saint. Close quote. Hey everyone, thanks for listening to this episode of Tim Bell Pod. If you want to support the show, head over to patreon.com/TimBellPod. There you can find bonus content, t-shirts, Man Scout Manning DVDs. You can even tell us who to cover in a future episode. That's patreon.com/10bellpod.